All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Meeting has been noticed to Evans Print and Media Group, WCOW Radio, Magnum Radio, La Crosse Tribune, Sparta City Hall, and Sparta Free Library. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, there are not.
All right, I would request a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
All right, I have a motion from Ms. Presswood. Do I have a second? Second from Mr. McKenna. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. If everyone would please stand and face the flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Then Mr. Russ, if you wouldn't mind going over the SASD mission statement, please.
I'd be happy to. SASD's mission statement is to educate all students academically, emotionally, and socially to inspire curiosity and resilience.
Thank you, Mr. Russ. As discussed, there is no public input tonight, correct? Okay, so on to item 2, reports. A, Innovation STEM Academy 2021-2022 year-end report. Mr. Sanders.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sanders, is that microphone on?
Can you hear me now? All right, thank you. Technology principal should know how technology works, but we'll figure it out. So we had 64 students. There was only 16 in our 6th grade class, which is a little smaller than normal. That's because we had 24 in 7th and 8th grade. We had 4 teachers, which put us at a 1:16 ratio. I always give praise to our teachers because it is a teacher-led school. So they just give me the opportunity to look important in front of you guys tonight. But you also see that we do have a wait list, a pretty significant wait list, 20 6th graders, 11 7th graders, and there were 7 8th graders. And part of that comes when an opening opens up, we call the next person on the list, and sometimes they choose not to do it because they already started 6th grade or they're halfway through 7th grade or whatever it might be. So that's how the wait list gets reduced. It doesn't really get reduced because we're having the opportunity to add more students. Next slide, please. So one of the things I just want to give a comparison, we do match up and look at the 2nd and 4th column. That shows the percentages. So we do match up very well with the middle school as far as having the appropriate percentage of middle school boys and middle school girls in our school. We do not recruit, or we don't have the opportunity to get as many students who have economically disadvantaged or require IEPs to be applied to our school, because it is a lottery. So we have no control over who's joining our school other than to get those students to apply to our school. So we have the opportunity to draw their name out of the hat, or it's actually a Google random number generator. We did, however, exceed the middle school's percent of students who are English language learners. Next slide, please. So there are 3 goals that I have to report to you guys on, and that's our goals are to have 80% of our students be proficient in reading, math, and science, and we were able to exceed those in all 3 of those goals. Next slide. One of the things that we really pride ourselves on at Innovation STEM Academy is getting our students out into the community. So the water testing is actually something that our students have been pretty involved with. They go to multiple sites. This is actually like the group training that we did. And then they break into smaller groups each month. Next slide. Always want to give a shout out to our co-curricular clubs. So Innovation STEM Academy is a middle school, but we actually compete with other high schools, and we place 6th in the state. So a lot of hands-on learning inside and outside of the school day. Next. Again, having the opportunity to take our students out into the community, we took them to UW-Madison for their engineering expo. And it was really neat because this is the opportunity for the Madison students to showcase their learning, which is what we have our students do every trimester. So they kind of got to see that, oh, this kind of learning and sharing continues past middle school. Next slide. One of the cooler things we do, we try to involve more community groups and parents. So we did an astronomy night as part of our Mission to Mars unit. And there's the La Crosse Skywatchers Club, I think it's called. They brought some really incredible telescopes, and we're able to see some things. A couple times we had to say, hey, moms and dads, why don't you step aside and let the kids look too? But it was a really neat night for that. And then the other picture is a living museum where our students studied a NASA man or woman, and then they pretended to be that person and they went to Herman Elementary School and presented to those middle school students. So those are just a couple pictures to kind of encapsulate the unique learning opportunities our students have. Are there any questions or concerns?
Any questions or comments from board members?
I just have to say, I love the Innovation STEM Academy. My oldest went through that program. He was on the wait list and got called at Christmas time, 6th grade year. He's starting this year as a senior and he only needs 4 credits to graduate. So he's been in all advanced placement classes throughout his whole high school career. So kudos to Mr. Amundsen and the rest of the teachers there. They're doing a fantastic job. I love the program. So
Thank you. I'll make sure they know.
Any further questions or comments?
Bob, I also, of course, appreciate STEM Academy. I think it's an outstanding program for us. Question I have is, I understand that it's a lottery so that you can't really control this percentage of low socioeconomic. But I think we can agree that parents of higher socioeconomic families are generally more involved, and so they're more aware of the opportunities. And so there's probably more kids from the upper economics that apply than from the low socioeconomic. So, sorry, long question. What do you do to make sure that all families are aware of this opportunity so that you get more applicants than you currently get from, you know where I'm going?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that actually has been beneficial is having 5th graders in our building that we can go out and reach out to. So this year, I know we invited 5th grade to come to at least one of our showcase events. And then we also had Ms. Lakowski went and talked to different teachers in 5th grade to their classrooms, again, to encourage those students to apply. We sent information home, both I believe it was hard copy pamphlets, but also emails that were translated into Spanish. So we had Mr. Amundsen doing STEM camp this summer, really trying to just increase the number of times that students in elementary school see Innovation STEM Academy so that they, again, when we did that Living History Museum, 3rd graders, then we can 5th grade, they hear more about STEM, they're maybe more likely to apply. But you're absolutely correct. That is a larger challenge that we have to recruit more people to apply.
Have you ever looked at the breakdown of applicants for consideration and what percentage where they fall within those 2 groups?
No. So a while back, I want to say, well, it was before COVID, so that seems like forever ago. I definitely did a study of the students who had applied for Innovation STEM Academy, but did not get accepted. The students who obviously applied and got accepted, and then the students who had not applied, and looked at their maps. I actually think it was Aspire at that time, looking at their growth. And even with that group of students who had applied, so again, alleging their parents are maybe more involved and interested in their education, Innovation STEM Academy students did grow more than the other cohort that applied but didn't get in. But I didn't look at the data as far as if they were, economically disadvantaged or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Well, thank you so much to you and your staff, and congratulations to the Science Olympiads. That's exciting.
Certainly.
You have a great day. Thank
Yep.
you.
Go fight, win.
All right. Item 2B, Mr. Wells, the WASB conference report.
All righty. So, so the first thing that we started out with, which was the stories we tell ourselves, the inward versus outward mindset. The key quote that was from that is we can be experts and passionately blind to things that are not in our awareness until something is brought into our awareness. We can be blind to it. So that brings into why does our mindset matter? As shown in that image there is that our mindset activates a certain amount of processes. So our actions, our behaviors are one of the key things that we can change to make change and promote action. But until we change our mindset, that's not expected for the long term. So how do we stick with them? How do we stick with fixing the problems that we have is by changing our mindset. So what's the difference between an inward and outward mindset? An outward mindset is is someone who looks towards the group and asks, how can I help them achieve their goals and how can they help me achieve our goals as a group, our goals as individuals, and so forth, versus an inward mindset sees individuals as tools. They see them as objects, something where you're either in my way, get out of my way, I need to do this in order to move forward. And that's an inward mindset. People with inward mindsets usually encourage others to be inward with them. And then people with outward mindsets usually encourage individuals to be outward with them. We can only control our own mindsets. However, how we portray our mindset sort of activates our ability to work well with others. So our purpose is to fill a need, and everything we do daily impacts someone else. An outward mindset helps us achieve our goals, and instead we need to ask the question of how understanding and assisting others helps us achieve our goals, our mission and vision. One thing that they brought up is that we should not, as they put it, blame the middle school, because we're like ripples in the pond, right? We have direct ability to influence others on a daily basis, and that we are not secluded in our own silos per se. We are our own individuals, but we also have the power to propel the district forward. So, yep. And the last point that she put out is that if we are focused on making things go right, we are less likely to fix things that go wrong. Next slide. Yep, that's the right slide. All right. So the next thing was commitment to all children, a focus on excellence and equity. So how do we fulfill the needs of all students while propelling their excellence? Equity might seem like a controversial topic these days. However, equity and education has been present for decades. Individuals with disabilities and the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act has been around for decades, and it ensures that all school districts provide appropriate public education for all students with disabilities. So how can we go forward and make it so that not that education is the same for all students, but how can we fulfill the needs of each of those students? And a key thing that they looked into was we provide a music program, or a wonderful music program for each of our students. And even though not all students are a part of that program, we meet and fulfill the needs and the individual interests of a variety of our students. So even, for example, extracurricular activities, why do we have a variety of that? Why do not we just stick to one and call that our goal? Because it doesn't necessarily fulfill the needs or the desires of each and every student. So what drives school districts? And one of the things that they talked a lot about was the moral imperative. And the moral imperative kind of goes back to this general statement where we want to provide the highest quality education for all students. And that's the moral imperative for, as it should be for all school boards. And they stated that not everything is purely academic, and that brought me back to my brother and growth, where my autistic brother, he just learned how to fold towels, right? And he learned specific life skills at school. Like, that's not necessarily academic, but it helped him improve and grow in his own specific way. Students that, and at the same time, we also need to understand that students that have already achieved, they need to continue and grow and learn. We do this through our AP program, and how can we continue to get students to grow and learn and develop, which is what equity is, right? We not just help those that are at a lower standpoint, but how do we still meet the needs of those that are well beyond their proficiency? So next question is, do our mission, vision, and pursued goals match both excellence and equity? And then they talked about how do we become more equitable? So a lot of the things that they talked about was community engagement with, especially with our large ESL groups, and how can we understand school students' cultural heritage and introduce that into the classroom so that it encourages participation on a variety of fronts, accommodating multiple learning styles, communicating high standards for students and teachers, and support teachers that have struggling students. Challenge underlying assumptions about the role or economic status and cultural background and how that impacts student learning. Providing professional development for our educators, ensuring discipline policies are clear and concise, and to do restorative practices instead of zero tolerance or exclusionary discipline. Use standards-based grading, allowing retakes and revisions instead of doing which I know the middle school's transitioning towards this, where they're doing a 0 to 4 grading scale of proficiency, so that if a student is struggling with one specific subject, it's not based on their total grade. However, it's based on a certain aspect and how we could propel students forward in all aspects of their education. And then having opportunities for the gifted and talented programs, giving all students the opportunity, not necessarily having a referral-based system, but just if a student really wants to challenge themselves and become better, I believe that we should have it so that all students have the opportunity to do so. Yeah, and just making sure that having language resources that makes participation easy and having meaningful ways for families to be involved in student learning, and personalize that communication. So I know even though we're transforming into the digital era, a lot of people still like that paper and pen, chalk on chalkboard type of communications. How do we meet all members of the community, especially parents or caregivers? Next slide. So next, they went into the governance mindset, which governance is the basic function of the board. And the governance core, which is a book that that a lot of superintendents and people of WASB have read, states that governance is a school board and superintendent working together as a unified team with a common vision, driven by a shared moral imperative. And governance is essentially the process where we set the direction and establish the organizational structure and hold both the fiscal and the entire program accountable. And good governance allows the entire organization to be unified and work together towards the same goals. So governance mindset had 4 main components. One was systems thinking. So it is us to be focused on children, not on ourselves, and to focus on long-term goals, maintaining the accountability and keeping constituents informed. So how does our system as a board member, how do we portray our ideas, and how do we make it so that we could benefit all children? And the board also has a strategic focus. We're not necessarily the administration team where we are doing the tactical things, like as was mentioned in our workshop today. It's more of a strategic focus where we look at the date. We don't look at the day-to-day objectives, but we use the superintendents and our directors' experience, and we guide using the strategic plan and long-term goals of the organization. So if we have that mission, vision, values, and our goals, how do we propel the district forward on a strategic level? Deep learning is the other governance mindset 4 components where we need to continue to be informed, focused, and engaged. Continuous improvement is a word that I use, and we achieve this by using quality data to make decisions, focusing on 3 to 4 strategic goals, and having an open and authentic discussions with not just ourselves, but community members and our staff. And then lastly is manner, how we behave publicly. Some boards and other individuals around the country, they behave poorly, and we should ask ourselves, we should honestly ask ourselves, we should be up here and being an example for our students and how they should behave as adults, as leaders, as people driven to make our communities better. And another fact there is that the demeanor of the board and superintendent have a powerful impact on the morale of staff. And I think that's essential as we move forward to, propel to increase our morale, because that could be one of those things that drastically impacts not just our students' ability to learn, but also affects our retention. And that's a personal goal of mine. And how do we improve on that aspect of well? Then they went into some other subjects where they talked about trust. High trust schools have an 8% improvement in reading and a 20% improvement in math. And it was the opposite. It's either they stayed the same or they had a negative turn if they were considered low trust schools. So there was 3 types of trust that they mentioned, where there is contractual trust, so being true to your word; communications trust, where we share our information, tell the truth, and admit mistakes; and competence trust, where we respect others' knowledge, skills, and judgment. We involve others, and we commit to building trust within not just our communities, again, but also with our other stakeholders. Then they mentioned other factors as well, understanding the ladder of inference. So if someone says something that is off the wall, how do we boil that down to understanding how did they come to that conclusion versus saying, you're wrong, what's wrong with you? That's not really the right way to go with things. So how can we, and that again comes back to that inward and outward mindset, where we want to understand people's objectives and goals and how we can work together to achieve those. So, if we understand the ladder of inference, and if they come to something completely strange, we understand a lot of that boils down to good communication. They talked, like some districts do board retreats where, not all of us might not agree on policy, but we might find some personal things that interest us, and how do we find each other on a personal level. Let's see. I had another idea that I didn't write down here. So I'm just going to go back to that ladder of inference again. And so we understand if we understand where do they came to that conclusion, we can also make moves to correct and develop that. They had someone from WASB mention that someone came up during one of these retreats and they're like, I don't like it when you don't read the material before these meetings, like you're never prepared. And he goes, well, I have kids, I work on the weekends, and on Monday there's the meeting and there isn't really much time. And then as they're talking, because they're at this entire retreat with their superintendent, the superintendent goes, oh, you just needed that sooner? I just released that on Friday just because that's what the previous superintendent did. So that communication also helps with developing not just our trust, but also having that open communication and acknowledging others and whatnot allows us to not just find the problems, but also come up with solutions. And those solutions might be easier than not. And last thing that they just said is just having a good attitude overall. Next slide. So Tom Thibodeau, I really appreciated his words of wisdom. He wasn't really like one of those, he never had a slide. It was more of like a dinner theater kind of experience. And I really appreciated that. So he started out his story where everyone, because his wife is a kindergarten teacher and everyone remembers their kindergarten teacher, and he dives in to how being there for the community and being right and just. And so the main thing that they always do every year is vote. And during March, or actually April of 2020, he and his wife go to the polls. She starts talking gibberish, and it turns out his wife has a stroke. So he ends up going to the hospital. He ends up taking his wife to the ER, and she's in. They put her in a coma and whatnot, so she can't talk. She can't speak for herself, and it's the middle of COVID, so social distancing, masks, everything. No one's in the hospital whatsoever. And the doctor goes, the surgery is required to save her life or make her life better. But here are the issues with the surgery. And one of those included death. And the nurse right behind, the male nurse right behind him, grabbed onto his shoulder and he said, "I got you, brother." And that kind of showed that we need to be there for other people. And as servant leaders, we need to be there for our communities and our stakeholders. And, just that feeling of, "I got you, brother. I understand you. I could feel where you're getting to." That's where one of his quotes said, where some say, "A word is dead. When it is said, I say it only begins to live that day." And then he talked about how, if you've ever heard of the book Tailspin, where this one guy from Western Wisconsin, his wife was dying of cancer, but at the same time, he heard about this World War II vet and 96-year-old World War II vet, and he ends up writing a book about not just his own personal struggles, but also listening to this man and not just listening to this man tell a story, how he got shot down by a German plane in World War II, and he ended up going for, as the book says, a tailspin down into, and ends up telling a story about how he survived a prisoner camp. And all this would have been erased with history, but someone sat down with this gentleman, even though he was going through his own personal struggles, and wanted to hear this man's story. And now it's a published book, and it's a part of history that won't be forgotten. And the last key point that he mentioned was, as a servant leader, the big thing that we are is that we're here today, right? And one of the things that he said was he used to play football at his high school, and the football coach said, "You're not here to play in the NFL, or we're here to play the game, and you guys are here to go to college, and that's what we're here to do." And he never played a game in his life, but he was just there for practice and whatnot. And this coach ends up being really well versed and ends up being on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And they had a picture from an original black and white picture with him on it, and he's never played a game of football in his life. So it kind of shows how, even though he wore the uniform, he was there, and he was there for his team, and he was there for everyone else. Now he's and never played a game of football, but still made it on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Just took the pants right off the shelf and put them back on. Didn't even have to clean them and whatnot. And that kind of shows that like the power of our presence, we're there, we're part of history, we're here, part of history. And you know, we're here making that change. We're here turning classrooms into communities. Our administration team and everyone out here is turning classrooms into communities. And that's something that we should really acknowledge and put forth. And
That's great, Todd. Yeah, no, and I do. I remember you and I spoke about that power of presence, and that is, we really appreciate that input and that information there. So thank you so much for that report. Are there any questions or comments at all from board members on that?
because this is the short version.
Well, thank you for that. I
Do-
sure
one
appreciate it.
quick
Go ahead,
question.
Colin. Yeah.
Do you have, did they share documents about like how they measured the trust? You shared a couple of those different versions. Did they share any of those resources?
No, they did not.
Okay.
They kind of went, I do have, they did have something on the outward, inward mindset, and I still
Yeah.
have the presentation slides in this folder, but one of those big things when it came to good governance is how we could be a trusting team. And a lot of that was also, and providing an equitable education was another one of those things where not just how we become a trusting team, how do we involve our communities, and overall how we be good leaders in developing that, because we know that we have struggled with trust in the past, and either doesn't matter whose fault it was, is that we now have to work together to repair that for the betterment of our schools.
Well, I think maybe finding maybe you'd be able to scan those slides in and share with the board. Would that be all right?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to give them to Mr. Russ, you can take care of that. Thank you so much, Mr. Wells. All right, item 2C, 22-23 budget update for Ms. Hauser.
So July 1st is really one of the first dates that's across the state for kind of kicking off the following fiscal year's budget. It's known as the July 1st state aid estimate. And it's really the first indication from the state for preliminary budget estimates for the upcoming budget. So the Sparta School District state aid estimate as of July 1st was $26,074,949. This is a number that catches a lot of media attention. However, from the business side of things, it's based on budgetary figures that are somewhat outdated. So they're typically from the beginning of the budget year. And so I wouldn't put too much concern into that number. But what I do is I take the formula that the state puts out, and then I plug in our most recent figures. And so I plugged in the figures from our audit that just concluded last week. And with that, our preliminary state aid estimate is actually higher at nearly 26.9 million. For comparison, last year, my estimate at this time was 25.5 million. So we're seeing a nice increase in our state aid. And if we go to the next slide, I just want to remind us that an increase in state aid is a good thing because it reduces the tax levy, but it doesn't equal more money in the district. So it doesn't increase our total revenue or our total budget. It reduces the tax levy. Some reasons for the increase in state aid are higher spending in the previous year. So that's known as shared costs in the calculation. And the bigger pieces of our shared costs would be our debt defeasance. So we paid down more on our debt this year than we have previously. And that estimate goes to show how, when we were talking about referendum and impacts, how I mentioned, we see that additional revenue a year later. And so this is proving out that the money that we levied additional last year to prepay debt, this is the return on that investment the following year. So the only way to adjust our total budget is really through the revenue limit or increases in per pupil categorical aid. Since we're going into the second year of the state budget, we already know that there will be no increases to those two figures. So we're continuing with a reduction in revenue that we've been planning on for several months now. The next slide is just a visual of the state aid and tax levy composition. So that complete bar is symbolizing our revenue limit, which makes up about 80% of our total revenue in Sparta. That gold portion of 28.5% would be the levy, and then the state aid is the other piece. You can see we're a very highly aided district, meaning for each dollar of revenue limit we spend, nearly 70 cents of that comes from state aid versus the local tax levy. And so as our state aid continues to increase, that red bar would get bigger and the gold bar would get shorter. So on the next slide, I have an update as to where we're at looking at our 22-23 budget. We've been referring to it as our budget shortfall for several months. Some good news for tonight is that preliminarily, we are looking that we are very close to a balanced budget. So administratively, we've been continuing to review positions that come open, certain costs, all sorts of things, and we've been adjusting our thinking in some places where we can. We've continued to have attrition, and that also paired with the revenue stabilization amount that the board is voting on tonight. We are very happy with where we're sitting right now for the end of July. So that is some great news. That all being said, preliminary is in caps and bold for a reason. We still have some major factors that are unknowns. One of the biggest one being our pupil count. So we don't get that until the third Friday of September, so middle to the end of September. That pupil count is so important because that's our $10,000 per student plus our per pupil categorical aid. So we are projecting right now a decrease in pupils just based on our enrollment project off of birth trends and things like that, but we'll see how that actually pans out in September. Open enrollment is also an estimate right now based on historical actuals. Where districts across the state, the open enrollment window is closed now, and so records requests are starting to come in and go out. So those also will be finalized that third Friday in September. Hopefully we're at the tail end of our attrition, which is staff leaving. But as any of those continue to trickle in, that will affect our expenses. And then another big unknown is inflation. So when we're getting renewals for contracts, or if we have projects we had bids on and need new bids, we're just continuing to see that impact of inflation, just like we are in our personal lives too. So those are really the big four variables that we will continue to watch closely throughout the summer. So on the next slide, so for the next steps, in August, I'll continue to update revenue and expenses as more variables become available or known. So if we're getting more indicators, I'll continually update that. And then also in August at the board meetings, I would like us to begin discussing the tax levy and mill rate and what our plans and what our thoughts are for that. So that in September, we can hopefully come to a consensus so that at our annual meeting, I can present what the wishes of the board are, and then we can get that feedback from the community. And then, like I mentioned, also in September, that'll be some critical timelines to really solidify our revenue estimates. Are there any questions on where we're at for this year's budget now?
Any questions from the board or comments?
Mr. Schulze, I just want to say a few
Yeah,
things.
please.
I just want to thank our community and our staff specifically about their patience and understanding as we've gone through this process. Obviously, it's through a difficult time, And, but their patience and understanding and the amount of dialogue we've had is very appreciative. I've also like to thank the building principals and the directors specifically for the amount of brainstorming, the amount of work they've done, and the amount of communication they've done with all of our stakeholders. So I just wanted to say it's a thank you to the community staff, our administration team, for all the hard work they've done behind the scenes to make sure that it's not easy to get to this step where we were when Ms. Hauser and I talked. And obviously kudos to Ms. Hauser and Ms. Kulik, who put a lot of time and effort in, especially in the staffing plan and running numbers and scenarios and through a very difficult time. So I just wanted to thank all of them.
Thank you for that. And I want to piggyback off of that, from me to the board members, this team has been phenomenal. Right, principals, the entire cabinet, you've all done a phenomenal job. So thank you so much for that. Ms. Hauser, I had a quick question on slide 24. Largest unknown variables at this time. Are we basing that information off of what we had this last year for pupil count, or did you take the number that had already been enrolled out, so on and so forth?
Yep. So for pupil count, we have a study done through UW-Madison Applied Population Lab. So that gives us some projections. And then I also do some multi-year averages based on what we know in our district. And so we combine it a couple different ways and then pick our estimates for pupil count, kind of looking at a few different models and finding that average. In addition, our student services team continues to get enrollments and changes to that pupil count daily. And our buildings are already looking at rosters and what classroom sizes are and things. So that really changes daily, and we're updating those estimates as frequently as we can.
Sounds great. Again, gives you a feel for the back story that's going on. There's so much happening. So thank you again for that. All right, item 2D, SASD safety report, Mr. Russ and Chief Nottestad.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody again. I just wanted to give a quick report out. On July 12th, we had a tabletop exercise involving many emergency management teams and stakeholders. And Mr. Stearman, if you can go to the next slide, please. Those are just some of the agencies, and I apologize if we missed them. But as you can see, this is a team effort. The parochial schools were here with us. Southwest, our transportation services, all of the administrators. And we did have, board members, Mr. Scholze, Mr. Burns Gilbert, were you there? No. So, so we had a lot of stakeholders there to walk through this exercise. And Mr. Stearman, if you can go back one, it was designed to be an experience, not a tactical exercise. And I was talking to Chief Nottestad afterwards, and I can just see them thinking, okay, the scenario happened at the high school. And I could see him, the police saying, okay, this is what I got to do. I got to do this. No, that's not the point of that exercise. We're going to do that down the road, but it's okay. This happened. What is the response from the district? What is the response from the police, from the dispatch area? What is the response from the district office? What is the response from the individual buildings? Not focused in on how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? But big picture things. We talked about what's going to happen after that. How are we going to relocate? How are we going to reunify? And what kind of services can we bring to the buildings? And from this, we're continuing our discussion. Safety is going to be a forefront. It's going to be on a standing item on our cabinet. And really, what can we learn and what can we communicate out? Mr. Scholze sent me a Uvalde school board meeting from their debriefing. Tragic is not even a strong enough word in what the families are feeling, but through that, you start to realize the importance and what can we do to be proactive, and what are some challenges that we face? What are some opportunities? Where can we put things together? This exercise was not a blaming exercise to say SASD was not ready for it. It is a learning tool for all agencies. So we're very proud that that came together. And this was in the works prior to COVID. Some people may say, well, we only got together because of the tragic school shootings. This has been in the works for several years, and we were pretty close to doing this, and then COVID hit. And then it's not that it put on the back priority, our safety procedures went to a little bit different. So we will continue to revamp what we learned, continue to do our exercises, and continue to learn together. But Chief, anything you wanted to add?
No, I think just something to reiterate what Mr. Russ said, we had this lined up pre-COVID. So had COVID not hit, we would have had this tabletop moved into our functional exercise and we would have been all the way through. Officer Nelson did a fantastic job helping really get these wheels in motion when he came on board. So we would have been kind of all the way through our drill series at this point. So we're kind of picking up that baton where we were back in the end of 2019 and kind of having to start at that point, but that's fine. We'll start and we'll just keep moving the same direction that we were. And so we're making plans for this point as to where we go next after the tabletop, and we'll keep moving forward. So.
And Chief, I'd like to just thank you and every member or affiliation agency that's a part of this. I know that when our crisis management or crisis response team gets together, we talk crawl, walk, run, right? And so making sure that we follow the right procedures so that we don't miss steps when it comes to a type of crisis response scenario. So we'd really like to thank you for that.
Absolutely. And we just want to make sure that we have best practice going all the time. And we constantly have that in the front of our mind, and that we're working towards the great end goal of, working together and having that plan in place. So
That's great. Any questions or comments from board members? Mr. Burns-Gilbert.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask from you two, and if anyone else that was there wants to share, but some of the takeaways from that experience that you're applying forward. And then I think would be interested in learning more about, you said kind of the next step in the process that was lined up pre-COVID. Like what does that look like for a timeline for us?
So we do have a next step set for October in one of the buildings for our department. I think we have a couple segues into that we'll do prior to being inside the building. The building's empty at that time. The building will be empty and our department will be in there, but we have a couple like tabletop and functional exercises just for our department in between now and then. But as a whole, when you looked at the list of all of the stakeholders that were involved, that entire group needs to move forward as well. And that can look a couple different ways, but in general, as we work with emergency management, we had this tabletop activity. Whether or not we do another tabletop, that'll move into a functional exercise it kind of branches off, and there will be first responder training and district training, separate for different groups, but together we'll move through those exercises up through live drill exercises, and what those live drills will look like in the end and who they will incorporate at that very end stage will be a conversation that'll need to happen involving the board and the district and law enforcement, and kind of decide what we want those to look like.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think number one is understanding it's completely collaborative effort. And if there's any way that you can use us as a canvas, to be able to help the agencies, I feel that we owe it to those agencies to be able to do that. So thank you so much. Any further questions or comments? All right, thank you so much. All right, item 3A, consent agenda. Is there anyone that feels the need to pull any items from the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make that motion.
All right, I have a motion from Mr. Hendricks. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Mr. Burns-Gilbert. Roll call.
Mr. Schulze,
Yes.
Mr. Burns-Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. McKenna,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Ms. Lopez,
Yes.
Ms. Prestwood,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 4A, discussion and possible action to approve the budget revisions for 2021-2022. Mr. Wait,
take
I'm
this.
sorry. Yeah, thank you.
So as I mentioned, we completed our annual audit last week. And so at this point, we are completely done with the books for 21-22. We did have a few final adjustments that we made during the course of last week. All were to the good or to the benefit. So we had some changes in Fund 10 and in Fund 50. Fund 10 is our general operating and Fund 50 is our nutrition program. So in Fund 10, we went into the audit with a ending addition to fund balance of 456,787. And we ended the week with actually about $90,000 more than that. That came from some little things here and there. It wasn't any one big thing. So that was positive. And then on the next slide, you can see the total change to nutrition. And this in essence was some state and federal funding that hadn't come in yet that we were able to book that revenue. So we actually ended with a much stronger fund balance than what we thought just 2 weeks ago. And other than that, everything stayed the same. The final budget will get posted in the Herald as long as it is approved tonight, and that is attached in board docs for you as well.
Any questions or comments from board members? Thank you for that great report. All right,
I'm
with that,
sorry, I believe we do need an action.
that's
item
where I
on
was
that,
heading
please.
right now.
Yep,
So
please
with,
do.
yep, with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the budget revisions for 2021, 2022.
I'd make that motion.
All right, I have a motion for Mr. McKenna. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second for Mr. Wells. Roll call.
Ms. Prestwood,
Yes.
Mr. McKenna,
Yes.
Mr. Schulze,
Yes.
Mr. Burns Gilbert,
Yes.
Ms. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 4B, Ms. Hauser.
Yes, so when we look at fund balance, there are certain designations of fund balance that to release that designation, we need board approval. And so at the end of the 2021 school year, the board had committed funds for upcoming capital projects. Those capital projects are now completed, so we need those funds uncommitted or undesignated. So that's what this motion is asking for.
Any questions or comments from board members? Mr. McKenna?
What were those funds committed to be used for?
Metal class slaves, electrical upgrades at the high school, installing air conditioning at Montessori, and high school band uniforms.
And are those things done? And this money is, okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Leftover.
Okay.
Further questions? All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to remove the committed funds that were BOE approved July of 2021 because the projects were completed during the 21-22 school year.
I'll make that motion.
I have a motion for Mr. Hendricks. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second for Mr. Burns Gilbert. Roll call.
Ms. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. Schulze,
Yes.
Mr. Burns Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Mr. McKenna,
Yes.
Ms. Prestwood.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 4C, discussion and possible recommendation to designate $175,159 of unassigned fund balance for revenue stabilization and designate the remaining unassigned fund balance for cash flow purposes.
And I do have an update. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is the slide from the committee meeting. Again, we had another $90,000 to the good. And so we had a lot of discussion at committee about our excess. Do we put to fund balance, to fund 46, maybe a combination thereof? And if you go to the next slide. Here is the administrative recommendation. So I highlighted there the balances that changed. So that revenue stabilization from committee, we had that 175,000, and administration is recommending the additional 90,000, adding to that 175. And then we rounded it so we can easily track it this coming budget year. So we're recommending $260,000 for revenue stabilization and the remaining for cash flow purposes.
All right, so just to clarify, we're going to entertain a motion to recommendation to designate $260,000 of unassigned fund balance for revenue stabilization and designate the remaining unassigned fund balance for cash flow purposes. Did I state that correct? Thank you. Any questions or comments on that?
So how much did we have it for designated for cash flow purposes before? So at the end of the year, are we adding more to that or no?
Yep, so that's the offset. So after we go through the 4 other designations and the revenue stabilization, any remaining fund balance goes to cash flow purposes. There are other categories we can pick, but that would be what we've done in the past and what I would recommend going forward. So yes, that number, it really changes daily. This is a snapshot as of June 30th.
And Ms. Hauser, refresh my memory, the revenue stabilization means that we can access that money without hurting our bond rating and so on and so on.
Correct. We can really access anything in that category. Putting it as revenue stabilization is our way of pre-communicating that we intend to use that to help balance our budget next year.
And so is that then one of the reasons that the budget is closer to being balanced because you're incorporating the 260,000?
You got it. Yep.
Further questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain the motion to designate $260,000 of unassigned fund balance for revenue stabilization and designate the remaining unassigned fund balance for cash flow purposes.
I'll make that motion.
I have a motion from Mr. Hendricks. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Second from Ms. Prestwood. Roll call.
Mr. McKenna,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Ms. Prestwood,
Yes.
Mr. Shozi,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks, Mr. Burns Gilbert,
Yes.
Ms. Lopez. Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 4D, discussion and possible recommendation to designate all other funds 39, 46, 49, 50, and 80 to fund balance. Ms. Hauser.
And if you go to the next slide, Fund 39, I had a typo on the committee side, so that's just reflected there. That is the actual amount that ended in the audit. Again, it's a better than what was on the committee side. And then Fund 50, as I already mentioned in the budget presentation, that got adjusted also.
Any questions or comments for Ms. Hauser? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to designate all other funds, Fund 39, 46, 49, 50, and 80 to fund balance.
Excuse me, I do have a question.
Yeah, of course.
So Fund 46, it says that it includes the 1,081,620. If we decide to do something slightly different with that, that number would be updated and reflected without changing motions or anything.
Correct. I will change that to reflect. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I have one question also.
Mhm.
So the nutrition services balance is now up to $622,000. Is that correct?
Further questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain that motion.
I will make that motion.
I have a motion from Ms. Lopez, Mrs. Lopez. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I have a second from Mr. Burns Gilbert. Roll call.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Ms. Prestwood,
Yes.
Ms. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Mr. Burns Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. Shozi,
Yes.
Mr. McKenna.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Item 4E, recommend transferring $1,081,628 from Fund 10 to Fund 46 in the 2021-2022 budget year to be used for future capital improvements. Ms.
All right.
Hauser.
Yep, next slide. So this is the same information that we went over at committee. You can see we have a beginning fund balance that we started the 21-22 school year with. We gained some interest income. We, through committee, talked about an $800,000 contribution from general operations that in essence was due to the OPEB dissolution. When we dissolved the OPEB, that money went to pay for health insurance, which then freed up budget that we had for health insurance. So we have that money available. Also, we had planned in the 21-22 budget chiller or HVAC project at Meadowview Middle School. Due to vendor delays, that project was pushed off. We're looking at within the next 2 weeks, we should be able to start that project. But so we'd like to shift the budget funds to the 22-23 school year. And then as of June 30th, we had spent about $273,000 on the South Side Playground and the Memorial Field expenditures that we had been invoiced for. I've had some questions about what the upcoming projects include. So I put those at the bottom, which is the completion of Memorial Field that has a budget of $3 million. Again, that middle school chiller project for $280,000. We've talked about some upgrades at the high school auditorium for sound and lighting, which we do not have a cost on yet. We also have a chiller or a HVAC project at Sparta High School scheduled that should be occurring in October. That it runs about $300,000. And then the next item on the agenda is the South Side canopy that we also talked about at committee meeting. So those projects would equate to approximately that total fund balance in Fund 46.
Thank you for that. Any questions or comments from board members?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I would like to entertain discussion about putting the 281,628 into Fund 46 capital improvements, along with 400,000 of the OPEB dissolution funds, and leaving 400,000 in Fund 10, labeling them for revenue stabilization. And the reason why I'm considering that, or would like everyone to consider that, is because the OPEB funds came originally from Fund 10 in this situation, they did. And I think that it is it's an appropriate place for them to remain. Yes, we would not get state aid on those this year, but they would be spent next year. And I think that there is some confusion in the community when we're transferring funds to capital improvements when we have a budget deficit. And we're also talking about important things that don't, like, although capital improvement is very important, we have to consider things that maybe are taking place in the classroom or with salaries. I believe that if we kept 400,000 in Fund 10, labeled it for revenue stabilization, we allow ourselves some more flexibility. We would definitely get the state aid next year, but I think it's a more transparent and a more understandable process maybe for the community, and still leaves us in a good place. We're working on, we have access to that for our deficit. So if we need it, we can use it, or we will use it. I would just like to see if anyone else has any thoughts about that.
So, so if we were to do that and not place $400,000 in Fund 46, would we still be able to afford the upcoming projects, Ms. Hauser?
Yep, great question. So 400,000, let me rewind. The 800,000 we had talked about when we talked about budget shortfall as a way that we could help balance the budget for 22-23 and 23-24. We had talked about using 400,000 in each year. And so the 400,000 for 22-23, that would be what's covering the high school chiller project and the South Side canopy. That remaining 400,000 for 23-24, we do not have tied to a particular project yet. So the upcoming projects we would be able to complete with Ms. Lopez's proposal.
Thank you. Further discussion or questions or comments?
But the the remaining 400,000 was earmarked then for projects for the following year because we also cut that out of the budget. Out of the capital improvement budget.
Correct. So they were earmarked for the 23-24 budget. We don't know yet what the budget shortfall will be in that year, but we are forecasting we will have a budget shortfall again in 23-24. So this would be planning ahead from the capital project standpoint.
So if we move this into budget stabilization, would that put us at a disadvantage then in the budget year 23-24? Because then would it not be available to us for capital improvements?
Budgetarily speaking, really is okay, and either one is really an okay option. It is highly likely that we'll spend $400,000 in 23-24 on capital projects so that we can keep up with our routine maintenance. However, leaving them in fund balance allows more flexibility. So let's say we only have $200,000 of projects spent. So I wouldn't advise one over the other. They're both suitable actions. The one fundamental difference is if you put it into Fund 46 this year, you get that state aid return sooner than if we put 400,000 into fund balance. It wouldn't be considered spent until 22-23. So basically we'd get that state aid 1 year delayed. But as you can see, I'm already projecting a higher state aid for next year anyway. So really both are good and decent options.
One question I have for Ms. Lopez is there a specific reason you'd like to see the 400? Is it again for the transparency aspect of it? Because it's my understanding that now, since we've had Fund 46 for 5 years, we can remove that 400 at any point. There's no wait period on it. So I'm just wondering what your context is.
We can remove it, but we still have to use it for that purpose, right? If it's in Fund 10, we can put it in Fund 46 if we need it there. I think we have more flexibility when it's in Fund 10. Correct. And so yes, it is a matter of transparency. As I said before, the funds that are in the OPEB fund right now came originally from Fund 10. I think that that Fund 10 is an appropriate place for them to remain. Right now we're in tertiary spending, or I'm sorry, revenue or state tertiary aid. Thank you. It's expected that we'll be there next year again too, but we don't know. 40 cents on the dollar, it's different than 70 cents on the dollar. But if it's 40 cents on the dollar next year, it's 40 cents on the dollar this year too.
Right.
So.
Mr. Russ, quick question. Are we able to, we can change that right now, right? I mean, it's not something that we'd have to go back to committee or anything like that, right?
No, we can change it right now. This was brought forth to the committee.
Sure.
And then the part of the committee item, we talk about things, we analyze things, and we can redo those motions, just similar to when we added to the 260,000 into the revenue stabilization rather than the 179 or ish, but no, this is acceptable.
One, and the only reason I asked is it just said recommend transferring. It didn't say discussion. So I just want to make sure that I was following protocol from a
We're good to go.
board standpoint. Okay. Further comments or questions?
My concern is that not just the state aid, but also it acts as like a separate savings account for capital improvements. If I recall correctly, we already have dedicated all our capital improvements to come out of Fund 46. So for this year, for next year, for foreseeable years. So if it's not going to be used this year, it's going to be used until we run out. So I mean, to me, we get state aid on it and it fulfills the same purpose. And then it also creates that snowball. It snowballs a little bit. Just because even though we're in tertiary aid, we also have to remember that other districts that are in tertiary aid get penalized. So we still get benefits from that. We still get to roll in from that and reduce If we wanted to consider it on a, because if we end up taking that state aid and putting it into to cover our bond repayments, or if we do something, we're saving the taxpayer that way. We dedicate it to focusing on keeping our schools structurally sound. I know some districts struggle with that, and they have to build completely new buildings. So that's just my big concern about it, considering that it kind of, even though it's in, when it's going to Fund 46, it's fulfilling that same purpose. And all we're doing is, because if we expect that it's going to be a problem this year and next year, if we have that in there, we end up saving troubles down the road.
Well, the thought process is you're aided on it now, and that's 400,000 less that you need to budget in 23-24. Correct, Ms. Hauser? Okay. All right, yeah, please.
Does that, if we make this change, Ms. Hauser, does that impact the preliminary totals and projections that you shared earlier tonight at all? The coming in preliminary, right, knowing that there's those variables.
Yep.
Yeah.
It would change it, but only to the better. So that would give us an additional $400,000 for those unknowns that we still have coming. So if those unknowns don't go in our favor, this would help us with that.
And then if we were to use it, right, essentially we're delaying that state aid another year.
Correct.
Right, is how that, so, okay. Just want to make sure I'm on the same page there.
Further questions or comments?
I appreciate this discussion, and I'm not necessarily opposed to the concept, but just the last comment that it's available for us to use if we need it is what scares me, because if money's available, we're going to use it. And I feel better knowing that it is in a place where we're saving it for the following year, where we've, we don't have any money budgeted for capital improvements. So
is that a motion?
well, I guess what I'm explaining is, well, I appreciate this discussion and the idea is good. I would vote against the change.
Sorry, what was that?
Because I'm concerned about the following year and the prospect that the money's going to be available and will probably get used.
Further conversation, Mr. Russ,
Well,
please.
The one thing I would say to that, Mr. Hendricks, is that we have a surplus at the end of this year. And we, when things start to, then, so it's not guaranteed that we will use it. Ms. Hauser's done a very nice job of forecasting this, and, and if it's not here, we can roll it over into Fund 46. But please know that we're just not going to be going, at least it's not my intention to go out spending and say, hey, we have $400,000 extra here. Let's go get this, this, and this. We're going to develop our plan. We're going to go forward with what we need. And then knowing the unknowns for the 23-24 school year, we're going to plan accordingly as well. So if we can save some money, like we've done in the past, to offset any deficit for the 23-24 school year and put it into Fund 46 even and get aided, we're going to do those things. So I fully trust that Ms. Hauser will be able to, and the directors and the board and the administration will be able to plan accordingly and be good stewards of our funds.
I'm not opposed to either option. I just personally like the flexibility of having the option to use it for capital improvements or whatever else important, responsible, necessary might come down the road.
What? I like,
Mr. McKenna, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's fine.
I think the things that we have that are major still possibilities could be pretty major. The one of them that we can predict is inflation. It's been all over the map. Gas is coming back down right now, but what's it going to be when the buses are running? I mean, there's no way to project it. I think we've done a good job You guys have done a great job of balancing the budget and cutting things as much as we possibly can. But if there's a year to have a cushion, I feel like this is probably the one. There's no telling what it's really going to cost to heat these buildings through December, January, and February.
And so you're saying to keep 400,000 in
I would.
fund balance.
I would.
That
And-
just
and if-
prevents
if
us
it
from
goes-
from
if it-
transferring back over.
If it goes
essentially.
unused, we just move it next year and get the aid next year.
Mr. Wells, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I'll start with a question. So what is our current projected budget deficit as of now?
We're still working on that because there's a lot of unknowns. To give a hard number right now is very difficult at this time.
Looking for projected estimate.
Yeah, I think the general number was that we have a
We're
balanced
balanced.
budget at the
Yep.
moment. Yeah,
Yep.
they have found a way to balance the budget.
So
I'm not taking ownership of that. That was
So-
phenomenal of you. Mr. Wells, do you have your microphone on?
Yeah.
Okay,
What's our guesstimate number? Just, is it, are you saying it's closer to zero than any specific number or?
Correct. Yep. It's close to zero with the huge disclosure that this is very preliminary and some of our key numbers, namely being pupil count or our enrollment, we don't know yet. So there are many factors that will get more clarity on in August and September. So as of today, it is close to zero. That doesn't mean it won't change one way or the other in the next 2 months.
Because I know the committee recommended, what was it, good, just round up to 200,000. Does that include that, or does that not include that money that we committee?
Yep, that is a piece of it.
That is a piece of it?
Yeah.
All right. And then the comment is that even in Fund 46, it's still going to be a future budget reduction if things go south, whatever it is, because like I said, we don't have capital improvements as a budgeted item. So that will be spent wisely just solely for capital improvements. So, and because we already chunked off $400,000 for the foreseeable future each and every year, that's where it's coming out of, is Fund 46. We are still doing these projects because of Fund 46.
Ms. Prestwood, you're the only one that hasn't spoken yet. Did you have any questions or comments on this?
I would have to agree with Ms. Lopez in that idea. I do like that we are pretty close to a zero budget, but having that cushion, like Mr. McKenna stated, having that cushion might not be a bad idea.
Okay, so hearing that, the new recommendation would be to transfer $681,628 from Fund 10, General Operations, to Fund 46, Capital Improvement Trust Fund in the 2021-2022 budget year to be used for future capital improvements. Is that correct?
Yes.
yeah, Ms. Hauser, do we need to add specifically 400,000 for revenue stabilization?
We could,
Yes, I would like to do that. too,
and would we
please.
like to do that as a separate item?
That would be terrific.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion to recommend transferring $681,628 from Fund 10 to Fund 46 in the 21-22 budget year to be used for future capital improvements.
I will make that motion.
All right, I have a motion from Ms. Prestwood. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a second for Mr. McKenna. Roll call.
Mr. Burns Gilbert,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks,
No.
Mr. McKenna,
Yes.
Ms. Prestwood,
Yes.
Ms. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. Shozi.
Yes. Motion carries 6-1. We'll add another item now, so recommend. Just wait a second here. Recommend allocating $400,000 of, was it unassigned fund balance right now? Unassigned, correct?
Yep, I
For-
would say, recommend increasing the revenue stabilization by $400,000. And that'll take care of the rest of it. Yep.
Wendy, did you get that? Okay, so we would recommend increasing the revenue stabilization by $400,000 from fund balance. Okay,
I'd make that motion.
all right, I have a motion from Mr. McKenna. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A second from Mrs. Lopez. Is there a comment or discussion? Oh, okay. Beat you to it. Okay, roll call.
Mr. Wells,
No.
Mr. Hendricks,
Yes.
Mr. Shozi,
Yes.
Ms. Prestwood,
Yes.
Ms. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. McKenna,
Yes.
Mr. Burns Gilbert.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1. Item F, discussion and possible action to approve Southside Early Learning Center's canopy to be paid through Fund 46 in the amount of $86,300. This is really basic here, so Ms. Hauser, go for it.
All right, so at the committee, we had a special meeting afterwards that we talked about the canopy, and the action was approved by the board for $86,300. What we missed in our motion was giving me approval to pay for that out of Fund 46, which was the intent. So to be in compliance with the DPI rules of Fund 46, I just need a motion giving clarity that that amount would come out of Fund 46.
I will make that motion to approve the $86,300 for the Southside Early Learning Center's canopy to be paid through Fund 46.
I have a motion for Ms. Presswood. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A second from Mr. Hendricks. Roll call.
Ms. Prestwood,
Yes.
Mr. McKenna,
No.
Mr. Shozi,
Yes.
Mr. Burns Gilbert,
Yes.
Ms. Lopez,
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes.
Mr. Hendricks.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1. Item G, discussion and possible action to accept grants and donations. Mr. Russ.
We have one for the board's approval. We had an American Endowment Foundation specifically to our band program for uniforms and instruments for a very generous $5,000. Very out of the blue. And obviously Ms. Thompson is extremely excited along with our new band director, Mr. Nicholson.
Any questions or comments on that?
Yeah, what is the American Endowment Foundation?
I'm not 100% sure. I can look into that and get you that, but it was very out of the blue.
We really like them.
Can we find that out?
I
before
can
we
find that
approve
out and let you know.
it? Okay, thank you.
And if you're listening, thank you so much for those grants and donations. With that, I would entertain a motion to accept the grants and donations.
So moved.
I have a motion from Ms. Presswood. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second from Mr. Wells. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And I did want to just recognize the Sparta Boys Basketball Club. Mary Sockman had a Cole Fellowship Award that she used her award to do upgrades in the weight room area and signage and equipment, along with some other things that she did with her award. But to finish off the project, the Boys Basketball Club donated $375, which was very kind to finish it off as well. So just for your information and just a nice thank you from the Boys Basketball Club.
And thank you from the board on that, Sparta Boys Basketball Club. We really appreciate that. All right, item 5A, announcements and information. Mr. Russ.
All right, a couple things to wrap it up. We have our meetings coming up the 9th and the 23rd, but before that, next Tuesday, we have the National Night Out in Sparta, the first one. I know Ms. Prestwood's been working very hard through the chamber, and it's between 4 and 8. They are looking for dunk tank people, and I might be in there too, who knows? But it'll be a great event. Hopefully the weather will be great because it is weather dependent on that. So, but hopefully we all can make it there. We've been promoting that because it is such a great thing for our community. And then we have the committee of the whole and the full board in August. A couple other announcements. The next slide, please. We had some custodians on the 13th. We have our annual WASBO, the school board, I'm sorry, the School Business Officials Association puts on a safety conference every year. And we had some individuals from our Sparta team. Mr. Hemmersbach took top individual. And then we had the team, Ms. Krieger, Ms. Cummings, Ms. Van Hornies, Mr. Lease, and Mr. Ebert took first place with that. And the next slide, they're all presented there. We're very proud of them because those things aren't easy. They take the day to go there and learn and get better, just like we always want to do every day. And it's very nice to see them rewarded for that as well. A couple other announcements. The turf should be in tomorrow at Memorial Field, should be started tomorrow. I made that mistake already once that it should be installed by then. Nope, they're starting the install. The bleachers are looking very nice. The press box is there and it's really starting to take shape. So very excited about that. And summer school ends tomorrow for our classroom sessions. We have Spartan Fit, we have the weight room, open gym and that sort of thing. But the culmination of hard work from our staff and our students are coming to an end in preparation for a great 22-23 start to the school year.
Thank you for that, Mr. Russ. And again, congratulations to all of our SASD custodians. That's phenomenal. All right, item 6A, closed session. I'd entertain a motion to move to closed session for discussion and possible action to conduct a formal evaluation on the superintendent as per Wisconsin statute 19.85, parent 1, parent C, considering the employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility.
I will make that motion.
I have a motion from Mrs. Lopez. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Mr. Hendricks. Roll call. Yes.
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 Motion carries 7-0. We are in closed session.